Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everybody. First, I'd like to just thank all of the people who sent me cards during this time when I was not feeling well, and also people who provided assistance to me in other ways. So now we will be resuming the course that broke off rather abruptly last April, and hopefully we'll be able to continue through without interruption. I know the summer might be an inconvenient time for some people because they have to go on vacation, but if you miss a class or two, the classes are being recorded. Hopefully they'll all go up on the Dow's website, and so you can pick up the classes that you missed on the website. And starting in the fall, the classes will be conducted generally on alternate weeks. I did this as a favor to the people who are taking Venerable Fifth-Tree Wang's course, which runs on alternate Saturdays, so that my classes will alternate with his, so people who are in his class will also be able to attend this class. Some of them made that request of me. But this was unavoidable. One class in November and I think one in December because of the holidays. If I tried to alternate Saturdays, I would have wound up giving one class per month, I think, which would have been too far spaced out. So one class in November, one class in December, inevitably have to coincide with the class with Venerable Tree Monk. But again, hopefully the whole course will go up on the website, and so you could get this class on the website or through a recording. Is my voice carrying through to the back all right? Okay, so I want to continue where we left off, but the interruption has been such a long interruption. First, I just want to sort of recapitulate the ground that we've covered already. In using this book, in the Buddha's Words, I have presented or organized the Buddha's teaching in terms of three types of benefits to which the Dhamma, the teaching, is intended to lead. I call these the benefits pertaining to the present life, or welfare and happiness in this present life. The second benefit is the benefit pertaining to a future life, and that is the achievement of a fortunate, happy state of rebirth. And then the third benefit is the ultimate benefit, the supreme benefit, which is the benefit of nirvana, or liberation. Okay, so I've just written the Pali expressions for these terms and the English translation after them. So these are the three goals of the Buddha's teaching. And in this book I have a whole chapter dedicated to the first goal, which tends to be often overlooked in both scholarly and popular presentations of Buddhism. But we see that the Buddha laid down many teachings for the guidance of people living family lives, guidance for husbands, how to treat their wives, wives, how to treat their husbands, parents, how to bring up their children, children, how to treat their parents, the responsibility of the government towards its citizens, responsibility of citizens towards one another, people towards one another. So all these are very basic to the Buddha's teaching. And my personal suspicion is that the Buddha probably gave many more teachings in this area than have actually been preserved in the text. The text, you have to remember, has been compiled by monks. Not to blame my own brethren, but two things missing are an extensive body of teachings given to lay people. There are teachings given to lay people which are, I think, quite significant and important, but probably many were not included because it's not the primary interest of monks. The other thing that's missing, I have to say very frankly, notice I use the word monks, there are probably also more teachings given to nuns. But when we read the accounts of the first Buddhist council, who compiled the text, 500 monks. How many nuns are mentioned? None. But there are a few texts delivered to nuns that are included in the canon, and one short but really beautiful chapter in the Samyutta Nikaya. It's, I think, chapter 5, the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, a short collection of 10 short but really beautiful discourses spoken by Buddhist nuns in verse. And then there's a whole collection called the Terigata, the verses of the senior nuns. There's also a corresponding collection called the Terigata, the collection, the verses of the elder monks. Guess which one of the two is much bigger than the other? Okay, so first level of teaching is concerned with well-being and happiness within life in this present world. And of course all the levels of teaching lead to well-being and happiness in this present world, but the first is specifically directed towards that purpose. The second is based on the Buddhist premise or Buddhist worldview that this life is not the only life that we live, but we go on from one existence to the next existence within this Samsara or cycle of birth and death. And so since we have to move from this life to a future life, we have to ensure that we will achieve a fortunate rebirth, not for the sake of just enjoying worldly pleasures, but to have satisfactory conditions for continuing to practice the Dhamma. And so when we enter upon this level of teaching, then the principle of karma, the law of karma, the law of provisional action becomes extremely important. And according to this principle of karma, our volitional actions, our will deeds, our deliberate deeds, create karma or a certain potential with the capacity to produce results, the fruits of karma, which correspond ethically to the nature of our original actions. So according to this principle, unwholesome karma, unwholesome deeds, that is deeds motivated by greed, hatred, ignorance, and other defilements, these types of deeds create negative karma, unwholesome karma, which can result in a bad rebirth, an unfortunate rebirth, and this kind of karma will also bring pain, suffering, and various misfortunes in the future. And then corresponding to this are wholesome actions, wholesome deeds motivated by generosity, kindness, compassion, understanding, and so forth. These wholesome deeds create wholesome karma, And this wholesome karma has the potential to produce a fortunate or happy rebirth. And then when the other karmas mature, they will bring happiness and good fortune in the future. And this process of actions producing karma, producing their fruits, according to the Buddha, this has been going on from time without discoverable beginning. And living beings go on from one life to the next. And so even if we gain a fortunate, happy rebirth, this doesn't mean that we've achieved the ultimate goal of the Buddha Dharma. So we can then pass away and take rebirth elsewhere, and then create unwholesome karma that will bring misfortune. And so the ultimate goal for Buddhism is the state of liberation, the state of release from the realm of birth and death. This is Nibbana in Pali, Nirvana in Sanskrit. This is the Buddha calls it Paramatta, the ultimate goal. And Paramatta, Hita Sukha, the supreme or ultimate well-being and happiness. Okay, so in the course of the unfolding of the book, so far we've completed the chapters that go through the achievement of the fortunate rebirth. And then before coming to the chapters that deal with the ultimate goal, with the path to Nibbana, I inserted a chapter which is called Deepening One's Perspective on the World. In this chapter I bring together various teachings that the Buddha gives which expose the shortcomings, the defects in mundane, worldly existence. And so far, in this chapter we covered first several sections which emphasize the shortcomings, the faults of sensual pleasure. And then I also covered the story of Ratapala. This is the story about a monk in the Buddha's time who went forth, took ordination as a young man, and then when he came back to his hometown, he explained to the king the reason for his renunciation. Okay, so now we come to the new territory. This will be on page 213 in the book. This is called The Danger and View. And this is an important aspect of the Buddha's teachings. That the Buddha's teachings are concerned not only with eliminating greed, anger, craving, the emotional defilements, but also and especially with correcting our understanding. But according to the Buddha's teachings, our emotional states are to a very large degree, of which we are seldom aware, conditioned by our point of view, the way we look at things. And so, for example, if a person accepts the view, this is the only life we live, when you die, everything's finished, then the person is constantly bombarded with sensually enticing advertisements or with images on television, popular media, wealthy tycoons flaunting their wealth. Then a person will think the ideal of our life should be just to enjoy sensual pleasures or to get a lot of wealth and then be able to show off and maintain a very arrogant manner towards others. And so we might simply think that the fault of this person is that they're overcome and obsessed by this sensual craving or by this idea of gaining prestige based on wealth. But if one probes deeply into what underlies those types of attitudes, one sees that it is the person's views that condition their way of naturally of perceiving the world, and then their way of perceiving the world in turn conditions the way that they relate to the world, the way they relate to other people. We would say that their views determine their scheme of values. So if one has a wrong view, in fact the Buddha says this in the Sutta, for one who has a wrong view, that person's attitudes are going to be wrong. When the person's attitudes or motivations are wrong, then their speech, their activities, and also their livelihoods will be wrong. A person who's obsessed by the wish to gain wealth might enter upon some lucrative but illegal way of earning a living, maybe peddling drugs, contraband, running a kind of, they call this a corporation that buys out other corporations. A hedge fund, I think that's the expression I'm looking for. Okay, so their speech, activities, livelihood would be wrong, their effort, their mindfulness, and their direction of mind will be wrong. That's the wrong eightfold path. And where does that wrong eightfold path originate from? Where does the Buddha trace it down to? Wrong view. Conversely, to get a person to embark on a wholesome way of life, one often has to plant in their mind the right view, the right understanding. And so the Buddha, in the sutras and many places, he's exposed the dangers in views. And in the sutta, we find different types, different grades, categories of wrong, let's say, I'll use a general expression first, erroneous views, misleading views. And of these misleading views, there are different categories, and the first category is what we call a wrong view. But sometimes this is called niyata, which means decisive or determinate or definite wrong view. Yeah, there were three types above this Pali expression, niyata nitadritti. It means fixed or determinate wrong view. Maybe in Chinese would be cui ding. Here, I'm not sure if that exists in the Chinese text. But niyata is only like cui ding, definite, determinate. Okay, so there were three of these wrong views that were quite prevalent in India during the Buddha's time. These were advocated by teachers who were rivals to the Buddha, because the Buddha often criticized them and rejected them. What I call the Neolithic view in Pali is Natikavada, which means literally it's the view that there is not. And those who held this view proclaimed that there's no point in giving, no point in making offerings, no point in practicing charity, no need to look after one's mother or father, no point in showing respect to ascetics and Brahmins, because there's this is their main thesis, There's no result, no fruit of good and bad deeds. They say that the human being consists just of the four elements. It's just a chance combination of material elements. And so as long as the body lasts, a person laughs and cries, enjoys himself or suffers, then when the life is extinguished, there's nothing left but a mass of matter which gets cremated in the cremation ground, and then everything's finished. And so whether you're a wise, there's no distinction of wise people and foolish people. The person who abstains from self-indulgence is foolish, losing this opportunity, missing this opportunity. The person who indulges, that's a wise person, since he gets the benefits of enjoyment in this life. And so from this, they drew the conclusion that there's really no point in observing any kind of principles of ethics, because these principles don't bring any kind of harmful or beneficial fruits to oneself beyond this present life. Okay, the second type of definite wrong view is called Acharyavada, which I've translated as the view or doctrine of non-doing. Okay, superficially this view seems similar to the previous view. I'll read what the text says about this view. The one who holds it proclaims, when one injures others or gives orders to have others injured, if one tortures, I have to make sure that this is not being recorded by the National NSA, when one tortures or inflicts torture on others, you can never be sure nowadays. If one mutilates others or gives orders to have others mutilated, if one inflicts sorrow, oppresses others, kills, steals, and so on, no evil is done. And by giving, by meditation, by self-control, by seeking truth, there is no merit and no result of merit. Then they say if one person goes on one bank of the river Ganges with a sharp sword and he just goes slaying everybody that he meets and just piles the body up, he doesn't do anything wrong. And if on the other side of the river Ganges somebody goes along with buckets of gold and hands them out to all of the poor people, he's not doing anything that can be called good or meritorious. So in this view, the way I understand it, the proponent is not necessarily denying the existence of past and future life like the first view. But what they're saying, seems to be saying, is that there's no validity to moral judgments or moral distinctions. Maybe arguing that this is just my own way of reconstructing their argument, that moral judgments are purely subjective. If one feels with one's hands, looks with one's eyes, one doesn't see any kind of concrete, substantial entity in the world that we can call good or virtue. And we don't see any kind of substantial, concrete article out there in the world that we can call evil. But these are all just ideas or judgments in the mind. And so one person's judgment, one person's perspective can be just as valid as another person. All judgments are purely subjective, purely personal. believe it or not, people who held during the Buddha's time, the people who held views like this, they were highly respected. Quite contrary to what their view might seem to suggest, they would lead rather rigorous ascetic ways of life. They shaved their heads. Some of them went naked or with just wearing loincloths. They were celibate, going on alms rounds for their meals. But still they propounded views like this. Okay, the third type of view, here it's called the view or doctrine of non-causality. And this is a kind of fatalism or hard determinism, which holds that everything is predetermined. So those who hold this view, they say that there's no cause for the defilement or corruption of living beings. That beings are defiled without any cause. And there's no cause for the purification of beings. That beings are purified and liberated without a cause. And then they further proclaim that all living beings, everything with life, everything with consciousness, all beings are driven from one life to the next by fate or necessity. So everything is a predetermined course that every living being has to pass through. And then when the time is right, each being will be liberated from the samsara, from the round of rebirth. Then to illustrate this, they use a simile. They say that the carrying on of living beings, the way beings travel through the round of samsara, it's like a ball of string. You take a ball of string, you hold one end of the string, and you throw the ball, and the ball just unwinds, rolling, 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 till when it comes to the end, the whole ball is completely unwound. Right? And so, it just happens through the momentum of the throw and the density of the string. But as the ball rolls, the string unwinds until it's all completely unwound. And so it's in the same way that a being unwinds through the round of rebirth till they get to the end, and then they're completely liberated. And so the conclusion that these people reached is that since everything is predetermined, there's no point in making an effort, no point in undertaking any kind of spiritual practice, no point in observing ethics, in avoiding wrong actions and engaging in wholesome actions. Okay, so these are the three types of wrong views which the Buddha strongly and repeatedly rejected. And the reason that he rejected them all is because they undermine the fundamental principles of ethics, and they can lead to complete corruption of character and of conduct. If one takes them seriously, then one might have no scruples, no hesitation at all to engage in unwholesome activities. And if one indulges in unwholesome activities, then one will create unwholesome karma that will lead to a bad rebirth. And so the Buddha says that views like this are what keeps the person going again and again down to the bad realms of rebirth. Now, what strikes me reflecting today is that many people today have skeptical doubts about whether there's any kind of rebirth, and often people who are trained in the hard sciences say there's no proof for any existence beyond this present life, and so let's just stick to what we can verify directly for ourselves, that this life is real, and there seems to be no life beyond this life. But such people often still hold very high standards of ethics. So I wouldn't say that people who hold this type of view fall into the first category, those who hold the nihilistic view. I think we have to understand that against the background of the time, the Buddha's time, when the sort of dominant, prevalent worldview was that there is such a thing as karma, there is rebirth, and I don't say that the Buddha accepted this just because it was the dominant worldview. The Buddha himself, according to the text, had validated this through his own direct knowledge. But against this background of the time, those who propounded the nihilistic view, the view of inactivity, the view of non-doing, the view of non-causality, those views would have been seen as radical, disruptive, dangerous to the moral harmony of society, the ethical pillars of society. And so, again, the background of that period is one who adopts a view like this would be very likely to use it as a justification for either engaging in unwholesome action or just being negligent and refusing to undertake any type of ethical or spiritual practice. Okay, so this is the category of definitive or fixed wrongdoing. And I explained the danger, and then the remedy is to adopt the right view. This is called the mundane or worldly right view. The right view that pertains to the worldly dimension of our life. This is the view that there is karma, there is morally determined actions, and these good and bad actions produce their fruits, fortunate and unfortunate types of rebirth, pleasant and unpleasant results in the course of existence. There are valid moral distinctions. We can discriminate between virtue and vice, between what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, between good and evil. We don't have to see them as solid objects existing out in the world, like this cup or these eyeglasses. But when people make moral judgments, they do so because they have reasons for these judgments. And so we can discuss the reasons why we hold different moral judgments and then try to validate our judgments or opinions. And then we have certain shared modes of understanding by which we can validate these judgments and determine which view is ethically correct, which view is ethically incorrect or invalid. And then, okay, so the first aspect of right view is to affirm the law of karma and its truth, and the validity of rebirth is the proper domain where karma produces its results. The second aspect of right view is to affirm the validity and invalidity of moral judgment, or put another way, to affirm that there is some basis for determining moral judgments to be valid or invalid. And the third aspect of right view is to affirm that there is a cause for the defilement and corruption of beings. For example, greed, hatred, and ignorance. There is a cause for the purification of beings. For example, observing ethics, practicing mental purification, development of wisdom. And to affirm that there is some point in making an effort in engaging in spiritual practice and in striving to avoid what is unwholesome and to cultivate the wholesome. It's not just a process driven by blind destiny. We're not just the victims of our fate. Maybe some say we're all the victims of our genes or of our childhood upbringing, the way our parents treated us. So if I go out in the street and start shooting randomly at the crowd, then I say, well, I couldn't help it. When I was 3 years old, my father beat me, and so I had to get revenge in some way. Couldn't hit my father, so now maybe a young man, 22, I go out in the streets with a gun and start shooting at a crowd. That's the way I get. So the blame isn't with me, but it goes back to what happened to me when I was 3 years old. I couldn't help it. Psychologically determined by what happened in childhood. So this is the wrong view. The right view is that we take responsibility for our own actions. Maybe I still have more to cover in the domain of views, but maybe I'll ask if there's any questions concerning these particular wrong views that I could discuss. Okay, if no questions, then I go on. Okay, the second type of wrong view, here we get to a subtler type of wrong view. This is what we might call speculative views. Sometimes the text calls them grasping the extremes, the two extremes. Okay, these two, under this category of speculative views of grasping the extremes, we have two views which are seen as diametrically opposed. That's why they're called grasping the extremes. These are seen as two views that go off to opposite extremes. And by doing so, the two views are mutually opposed, constantly coming into conflict. So one of these views is called eternalism, Sasatavada. And this is the view which affirms the existence of some kind of permanent, eternal entity. Usually, this view is formulated with regard to oneself, and so it's the view, sort of the most important formulation of eternalism is the view that the person has an eternal, everlasting self, some kind of permanent soul. Another version of this view, closely connected with the view of the permanent self, is the view that this world has been created by a permanent God, a God who is eternal and everlasting. And so then the aim or objective of the spiritual life becomes to establish some kind of favorable relationship between one's own eternal, everlasting self, and the eternal God. Okay, the opposite view to this is called Annihilationism, Uchedavada. Ucheda means literally cutting off. So this is the view that the person exists as a kind of substantial entity in some way through the course of this one life, and at its death, that person comes to complete end, that there's nothing at death, nothing after death. Now these views are, according to the Buddha, wrong views, or incorrect views. So they're not necessarily hindrances, or especially eternalism for the Buddha is not necessarily a hindrance to a favorable type of rebirth. Because a person, say, believes in an eternal soul, believes in good, all-powerful God, loving God, so that person, based on these beliefs, can do wholesome deeds of very high quality, believing that God instructs us to love our fellow human beings. This person can develop a mind of great love and compassion, serve others, help others, and so this will be good, wholesome activity, which will contribute towards a favorable, happy rebirth, even in the heavenly realm. And so this view is not necessarily an obstacle to spiritual progress, but according to the Buddha, it's an obstacle to liberation, because it still involves a clinging to the view of some eternal self, and a clinging based on a craving for continued existence within this realm of rebirth. And so we have in our textbook on page 215, the Buddha speaks about how beings, human beings and deities, are held by two kinds of views. And he says, because of this, some hold back and some overreach or go too far. The ones who hold back, these are the ones who grasp the eternalist view. And he says, to illustrate this, or to explain this, he says, how do some hold back? Devas, that's deities, and human beings delight in existence, that's in Samsara existence. They are delighted with existence, they rejoice in existence, and so when the Dhamma is taught for the cessation of cyclic existence, then their minds do not enter into it, acquire confidence in it, settle upon it, or resolve upon it. Thus, some hold back. So those are the ones who hold to the eternalist view. But the others go too far. These are the annihilationists. And then the Buddha explains, how do some overreach, going too far? Here, some are troubled, ashamed, and disgusted by the same existence. Maybe in this category, say the annihilationists, thinking of some contemporaries. Recently, you might think of the French existentialists, like Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, very intelligent, deep thinkers, and they found, in a way, they come close to Buddhism with a perception of the suffering of existence. And then maybe some come to the conclusion the only way to end the suffering is just, since we don't believe in any God or any soul, when this life comes to an end, everything is finished, and then that will be the blissful, peaceful end of it all. So some are troubled, ashamed, disgusted by this existence, and then they rejoice in non-existence, saying, inasmuch as the self, they still believe in the self, is annihilated and destroyed with the breakup of the body and does not exist after death, that is peaceful, that is excellent, that is just so, that's the way it is. So that is their great wish, is to be liberated, but not through any process of spiritual development, but they just believe when death takes place, that's the end of this miserable existence to which we're condemned. And so this view, too, is an obstacle to liberation. Often it could be an obstacle to heavenly... It's an interesting question. Can it be an obstacle to... Is it necessarily an obstacle to a higher rebirth? Maybe some who take this view still think to give meaning to our existence, even this could be doctrinal views, existentialist views, we have to have some meaningful commitment here and now by doing something good, taking some kind of self-sacrifice. And so it could encourage people to do good activities. Even though they don't believe in any, they might do good activities. When they're dying, they think, everything is coming to an end now, blissful, ever peaceful, non-existent. Then they die, open their eyes again, and wow, I've been reborn in heaven. How did I get here? Okay, what's possible? I don't know. Okay, anyway, according to the Buddha's teaching, both of these views are obstacles to liberation. And so the remedy, what is the way out of them? At the first level, we have to give up these two extreme views, not hold to either of them. And then we have to acquire the right view. This would be not just the mundane right view of karma and its results, but this would be the right view of dependent origination, paticca samuppada, which is the middle way, the Buddha calls paticca samuppada, dependent origination, the middle way between the two extremes of eternalism and annihilationism. And so in the same sutta, in the next paragraph, he states very concisely that right view, this kind of experiential right view. How do those with vision see? Here amongst these what has come to be as having come to be. That is, one sees what has arisen as having arisen from conditions. And one understands that as long as the conditions exist, this process of becoming will go on. And then since one knows the process of origination, then to gain liberation, one practices to put an end to the process of origination. And then that takes us into the other aspect of this right view, which is understanding the three characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and non-self. I don't want to explain these any further now because we get to them later in a later chapter. Okay, then the third Okay, so that was the second category of views, of wrong views. The first category were the determinate or fixed wrong views. Second category are the speculative views or extremist views. The third category, the third type, is the deepest, the subtlest of all. This is what is called in Pali Sakkaya Ditti, or sometimes Annihilationism, which we translate as identity view or the view of self. This type of view is what we call identity view. Sometimes it's translated as personality view, which is a bit misleading because the word personality suggests a person's character, which is not what it's meant here. Or also it's called Annihilationism, which means view of self, view of the self. And basically what this means is the view that there exists a self which is identical with or which stands in some relationship to the five aggregates that constitute our phenomenal being, or phenomenal identity. These five aggregates are, we call this material form, basically the body, feeling, which is not emotion, but the tone, I call it the tone of experience, as being either pleasant, painful, or neutral, the way we experience things, either as pleasant, painful, or neutral. Perception, the way we cognitively organize and categorize our world. And the fourth aggregate is a kind of big category which includes all kinds of volitional activities. And so what we ordinarily call emotions we come into this category. And then the fifth is consciousness, the knowing of things through the six senses. And so what we refer to as myself, what I am, this is a combination of the five aggregates. And now identity view is the positing of a self, or the holding to the idea that there is a self which stands in relation to these five aggregates. And this relationship can be of four kinds. One holds either that the self is identical with one or another of the five aggregates, or with a collection of five aggregates. So one thinks, I am the body, I am feeling, I am perception, I am my will's activity, I am consciousness. Maybe the strong athlete, or the beauty, the bathing beauty, thinks, I am the body. The poet thinks, the musician thinks, I am feeling. The painter or artist, maybe the intellectual thinks, I am perception. The person of action, businessman, political leader, organizer, I am political activity. And then the philosopher, thinker, thinks, I am consciousness. Myself is consciousness. Okay, so one way is identification. I am this or that. The other second is myself possesses one or another of the five aggregates, or all of them together. So here the self is separate from the aggregate, but that which possesses them. Then the third is that the self contains the aggregate. This could have been the type of view that was prevalent in some of the Indian schools contemporary with the Buddha. They believed in the idea that some of them there's this great universal self and that everything is contained within the self. For example, this was the view in some of the Upanishads, which became the basis for the later Vedantic philosophy of Hinduism. And then a counterpart view to this is the view that the self is something extremely subtle, extremely minute, which exists within the five aggregates, or within one or another of the five aggregates. So in this view, that also we find this in the Upanishads, the self, the Atman, is greater than the greatest, but it's also smaller than the smallest, subtler than the subtlest, and is to be found by going deep within the heart, into the cave within the heart, and there when one is able to penetrate through meditation into that hidden cave within the heart, then one discovers the light of the self, the light of the Atman, which illuminates the whole universe. Okay, so these are the different ways in which identity view, or self-view is formulated. Then the danger that the Buddha sees in holding identity view. In fact, this was, he called it the cross of the Buddha's teaching, because all of the other teachers contemporary with the Buddha all taught that the self exists in one way or another. And so the unique teaching of the Buddha, the very special teaching, is the teaching of non-self anatta, which is intended to root out all of these views of self. So what is the special danger that the Buddha sees in holding to the adopting any of these views of self? If we go back to one of the early chapters, actually to the first chapter of this book, on the human condition, this is on page 33, starting on the bottom of page 33, anxiety due to shame. Here the Buddha explains how there is agitation through clinging. He explains how the ordinary person holds one or another of these views of self, say with regard to the body or form, and then the form of his changes and alters, and then with the change of form, change of bodily form, then his mind becomes preoccupied with the change of form. And then agitation and other mental states arise because of that preoccupation with change, and then they obsess the mind. And so then when the mind becomes obsessed and worried, then one becomes frightened, distressed, and anxious. And that is how, because of clinging, this agitation occurs. So, because we identify with these five aggregates, then when they change, when they undergo any kind of degeneration, decay, then we become worried, anxious, fearful, even despondent and desperate. So that's one danger. But an even deeper danger is that the Buddha considers that this view of self is a type of clinging, a cell type of clinging that keeps one bound to the cycle of samsara. And so no matter what type of view of self one adopts, then through that view one binds oneself to continuation of existence in samsara. Here again we have a sutra that we already covered, but when we look back at that sutra in retrospect, we could see more meaning in it. Here this is the sutra called Dog on a Leash on page 39. Just starting with the paragraph near the end of this page called, starting with Suppose Monks. There's a dog tied on a leash and the leash is bound to a strong post or pillar. When the dog wants to break away from the pillar, it runs out, keeps on running, but as it runs, it just turns around and around and around that same post or pillar. And so the Buddha goes on, the uninstructed ordinary person regards the five aggregates as self. And so because that person is regarding the five aggregates as self, the person just goes on running round and round form, feeling, perception, volitions, and consciousness. And as he goes running around them, he's not free from form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, not free from birth, aging, and death, not free from sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and despair, not free from suffering. Okay, so this takes us through the section on views. Maybe I'll ask if there's any questions and anything covered so far. Yes, Bobby.
I'm used to the Mahayana Sutra.
Yeah.
And there is the aggregate form, feeling, perception, mental formation.
This is just a matter of translation.
But they feel very different, a mental formation and volition.
Yeah.
Can you say something about
Okay. I mean, what's stated in the Heart Sutra in Sanskrit would have been the same. I mean, there's no difference between the way the five aggregates would have been expressed in any early Sanskrit Sutra and the Heart Sutra, or, I mean, in Pali it's Sankara Kanda, Sanskrit Sanskara Kanda. It's just a matter of different choices of translation. Okay, what is meant by the fourth aggregate? The way it's explained in the Sutras, the Buddha gives prominence to what's called cetana, which really means volition, the volitional faculty of the mind. That factor by which we choose courses of action. But then, the Buddha mentions many other mental factors within the sutras which are not categorized within the five aggregates. But then the later text, which is in the Abhidharma period, when they explain the five aggregates, they incorporate these other mental factors within the Sankara Kanda, which is reasonable to me, because the five aggregates have to really cover all conditioned phenomena of the person. And so I think the Buddha mentioned volition just to highlight the most important components. But all of the other mental factors also go within the Sankara Kanda. So I translate volitional formation, which gives emphasis to the factor of volition that the Buddha points to in the Sutras. But earlier translators used mental formation. It doesn't really have that ratio. Yeah, I think it should be used, the microphone, the microphone.
So, These could be categorized as formation.
Oh, chitta. Okay, see, that's whether chitta can be categorized within the formation. You see, the sutras use three terms that relate to the mind. How to go about this? Just opens up a very big subject. Okay, the sutras, the only text they distinguish between, let's say, in the speech of the five aggregates, there's a distinction between vijnana consciousness and other mental functions that are associated with consciousness, that's feeling, perception, and volitional formations, mental formations. Correct? So we have on one hand consciousness, on the other hand these mental factors. The sutras mention another word in a different context, not in relation to the five aggregates, but when speaking about the mental activities of a person, they use the word chitta, which is what we translate as mind. Okay, so when later Buddhists think, actually in the sutras themselves sometimes the Buddha says, that which I call vijnana consciousness, that is also what I call chitta, or mind, and what I call mano. Mano also is like mind. And so these three words are actually synonymous. Consciousness, chitta, which we translate as mind, and mano, which I also have to translate as mind. I don't know how differently. Another way to translate it. Sometimes we use mentality, mentation, artificial words, which in English you only have one word which is really good, mind. To get another word with the same meaning, you have to throw in an artificial word, mentality, mentation, cognition. Well, the microphone is not contained. Try again. Speak directly into the mic. And project your voice.
Taking a little confusion because when you're making volition includes all kinds of emotions.
Yeah.
When we actually practice looking at mind, usually it is the state of mind includes all kinds of emotions. That's why
Okay, so this aspect, let's get into a rather complicated issue which relates to the Satipatthana Sutta. When the Satipatthana Sutta describes contemplation of mind, Sridhanopassana says, how does one contemplate the mind? Okay, when there's a mind with lust, one knows there's a mind with lust. When there's a mind with hatred, one knows there's a mind with hatred. A mind with delusion, one knows there's a mind with delusion. So lust, hatred, delusion, lust and hatred are definitely emotions. And so actually, I hope this doesn't get confusing, lust and hatred themselves actually belong with the mental formations of volitional formation. But, you see, lust and hatred are not chitta, they're not mind itself. But the way, how do we identify mind? Mind itself is extremely subtle. Like if you try to identify what is mind apart from its components, if you try to identify mind apart from the qualities that are modifying it, it's almost like trying to say what color is space, what color is air. One can't see any color to air or to space. But the way space gets perceived, we see the colored background. You know, if I see red there, the white wall, then I can get some idea of the space between myself and the wall. And so the way we get some idea of the nature of mind is by seeing, in the initial stages, seeing the factors that arise associated with the mind. That's the way we sort of focus in on the mind, by looking at the growth factors that arise along with it. And so we now identify mind that's arisen together with lust, together with hatred, together with delusion. But after it's experienced enough, then at a certain point one could just drop identifying the associated qualities, and then just focus on chitta itself, on mind itself.
Beyond the argument, mind is thinking, but I don't believe consciousness.
I can't maybe use the microphone again.
Mind, the chitta is identical with the vijnana, mind.
Yeah. Vijnana, chitta, mano, technically they're identical. Those are three terms we usually use in different situations, in different contexts. We come to that later, so I won't devote more time. I don't want to devote more time to this now. Any further questions? Yeah, I think Richard has questions here.
Question on the distinction between annihilationism and nihilism.
Yeah.
Nihilism perhaps takes things further, that there's no value judgment, and they both think that there's no other life.
Yeah. Okay, this is a good question. He's asking about the relation between what I call the nihilistic view, Nakkavada, and the annihilationistic view, which is the Jayavada. So they seem very similar, and what I would say is that the way I would understand it, what's a little bit puzzling to me, I would say firstly, is that this question is not actually explicitly discussed in the text, so I've had to ponder it a little myself. But it seems to me that the nihilistic view is just a kind of subcategory of possible annihilationist view. That if one adopts an annihilationist view, holding that with the breakup of the body after death, everything comes to an end, it doesn't automatically commit one to adopt this extremely extreme moral anarchy, or this extreme moral anarchism, that it doesn't matter what one does, don't do any good, don't avoid evil, just because there's nothing is going to result from it. And in fact, the text even mentions some annihilationists who practice the higher meditations. I don't understand that. Well, maybe they find it more blissful and more peaceful, even though they don't believe in any afterlife, but they find these states more blissful, more peaceful, so they practice them. The jhanic states, and especially the formless meditation.
Your categories, the three categories of wrong view, is that in the scriptures? Two specific three categories, three levels.
All these types of views themselves are in the scriptures, but this particular way of ordering them in terms of determinate or definitive wrong view, the speculative views, an identity view, not in the scriptures themselves. I've just put them together in this way.
It's amazing to live with all the translation problems.
To tell the translation.
I just actually often see that will define view, and then we'll say view, and sort of like that. No word subject, and the view is a evil view.
Yeah.
And extreme view.
Yeah.
View the two sides, and then self view. Now I think there is perfect sense here. The first level would be evil view because it contributes to ethical practice.
Yeah.
The second view would be it stops you from going to the next level.
Yeah.
And the third one really is where the noble ones need to break through.
Right.
So that actually makes perfect sense. However, the fact that it's not in the scripture.
It's not organized in that sense.
Can I ask a second question?
Yeah.
Second question is that you mentioned the two dangers, the holding self-view. And the first part you quoted page 33. And then you talk about the self-view cause of education.
Right.
Can you explain this a little further? Because, for example, here's one person's self that's contained in everything.
Yeah.
In the example you gave us, person may want to meditate, to keep meditating and trying to keep yourself inside. I would think that gives us more stability, meditating more stability than education.
Yeah. Okay, this is actually a good point. Let me just get it to the recording. Her point is that it seems to her that not all of the versions, the 20 versions of identity view necessarily lead to agitation and anxiety and fear and so on. Because if one has a view of the self which is apart from the five aggregates and, to be discovered within the five aggregates, even though the five aggregates change and decay, because one has this view of the stable self, then one can remain calm and balanced amidst the changes of the five aggregates. I have to agree with that. There are views of self which give comfort and stability amidst the changes and fluctuations of the world. So I think we have to take that statement not as having a kind of absolute and unqualified binding validity, but as applying to the cases where, like, a very ordinary person without any kind of meditative development just identifies the self with the five aggregates, or even though they identify a self separate from the five aggregates, but still they're very much infatuated with their experience that occurs through the five aggregates. And so then when the five aggregates decay and deteriorate, they become anxious and distressed. So that's the way I would see it.
The way we discuss the consciousness here, would you feel comfortable when we say the word to say that there is consciousness in the tree? Do you feel comfortable with the statement?
Okay, the question is the way I use the word consciousness. Would I feel comfortable with saying that there is consciousness in the tree? The way we understand the word consciousness in Buddhism, we'd have to say that trees and plants don't have consciousness in that sense. Because what is meant by consciousness, let us say, would be an individual center of consciousness. And so if plants and trees had consciousness, well, the definition of killing, the evil deed of killing, is cutting off the continuity of consciousness in a living being. Then to kill a plant, even for the purpose of food, would then become a case of killing, would create the unwholesome karma of killing. And so, in order to get our basic food, those who provide our food would be unable to escape the karma of killing. What we would say is that plants, this is my personal opinion, plant life will have some types of vital functions. You could say that definitely plant life has vitality, and along with vitality there are certain functions which seem to mirror functions that are developed at the level of consciousness. We might even say that the emergence of consciousness is to some extent foreshadowed by the functions of plant life. but I'm doubtful that within a plant there's a unified center of mental activity, and that unified center of mental activity would be a necessary criterion for determining that there is consciousness in that entity. Of course, one could I'm not a scientist, a biologist, but one could point to certain difficult cases. There's the flatworm. When you cut it in half, then you get two functioning worms. So you say, what happens to the consciousness of that flatworm? You speak about you just spoke about one unified center of consciousness. Does that one unified center of consciousness break into two? Or when you cut it, does another center of consciousness float into it from space or from some other living being? I don't know. But just as a general point in Buddhism, plant life is considered alive, to have vital activity, but not to have vijnana, consciousness, awareness. Okay, I still have a few points to cover within this chapter, so I think I'll go on now with the rest of the chapter. Because now we've covered through the danger of views. There are other dangers in views I should mention, which I'm not going to discuss here, but they're especially highlighted. The best place to find them in all of Buddhist literature is in the work called the Sutta Nipata, chapter number 4. It's called the Astakavagga, the chapter on the 8. Some of the sutras within that chapter deal with how the different philosophers in the Buddha's time held to their views, engaged in these debates, and then they would argue their views against those who hold other views. They become very, sometimes violent in defending their views, upset and miserable when they lose in debate. These ideas are dealt with in great detail in that chapter. Okay, continuing now, I come to the passage on page 216. This is called From the Divine Realms to the Infernal. Okay, and this section deals with the dangers in higher states of meditation which are not accompanied by sufficient insight or wisdom. And we have in the Anguttara Nikaya two suttas which are very close together. One explains this point in terms of the 4 jhanas, the 4 levels of meditation, meditative absorption. The other in terms of the 4 Brahma-viharas, the 4 divine dwellings. I chose here the sutta that explains it in terms of the 4 divine dwellings. Okay, and this sutta states that there are 4 kinds of persons found existing in the world. What are the 4? First, some person dwells pervading, I'll just make it a little brief, he dwells pervading the whole world with a mind of loving kindness. Okay, he relishes this, he takes a liking to it, he's thrilled by it, because it's such a wonderful, expansive, elevating state of mind. Okay, now, if he is firm in this, he holds to it firmly, he's resolved upon it, he's constantly practicing it, and when he dies, he still has possession of that state. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have to die within that meditation, but he's still practicing that meditation from time to time, up to the time of his death. Then he is reborn in the Brahma world. This is one of the high divine realms. And the lifespan of those devas, of those deities, is an aeon. An aeon, as I explained earlier, is the cycle beginning with what would be the equivalent of a Big Bang, up to the maximum expansion of the universe, followed by the period of contraction of the universe to the end of the period of contraction. Maybe 35 billion years, something like that. Okay, so now this person who's, a worldling, that's an ordinary person, one who's not reached any level of enlightened realization, remains there all his life, through the entire lifespan. He dwells in this Brahma realm. Then when he reaches the end of the lifespan, the text says he goes to hell, to the animal realm, the domain of spirit. The commentary consolingly, and I think validly, explains that one doesn't pass away directly from the Brahma world to one of these lower realms. But when one finishes with the Brahma world, one comes back to the human world, or something close to the human world. But then, if one doesn't have sufficient wisdom to guide one, one might get corrupted, create unwholesome karma, which will then lead to rebirth in the lower realm. Okay, but then the text continues, the Blessed One's disciple, this would be a disciple who has reached some degree of enlightened realization, generally what's called the minimum level of extreme interest, also remains there for the full lifespan. And then when he has completed the entire lifespan in that realm of existence, then he attains final liberation, nirvana. So the text continues, this is the difference between the instructed noble disciple of the Buddha and the uninstructed, unwise worldling with respect to their future destination. Okay, the next passage, again, develops in the same way, except that here the practitioner is practicing compassion, karuna. Again, he takes a liking to it, he relishes it, he's thrilled by it, and then if he still has it at the time of death, then he's reborn in a still higher deva world, divine realm. This is called the realm of the devas of streaming radiance, because these devas have light constantly streaming off their bodies. Okay, the lifespan of these devas is 2 aeons. The worldling remains there all his life. Then when he has completed the lifespan, he goes to hell, the animal realm, or the realm of the spirits. Whereas the Buddha's disciple, when he has completed that lifespan, attains final nirvana. The third passage deals with the development of mudita, altruistic joy. Okay, one who develops this extensively gets reborn along with the devas of refulgent glory. Does anybody know what refulgent means? That's how I use it, but I think it also has the idea somehow of coming off the body, surrounding the body. Anyway, it's a very high state of existence. Okay, the lifespan of these devas is 4 aeons. Again, the worldling passes away, takes rebirth elsewhere, and at some later time might even take rebirth in the lower realm. But the Buddha's disciple gets reborn there, then developing his wisdom, he attains final nirvana in that realm itself. The fourth case, the person develops the mind of universal equanimity. Somehow he holds to that state, is intent upon it, and then he gets reborn amongst the devas of great fruit. These are a still higher realm of devas. And the lifespan of these devas is, one would think, 8 aeons, but somehow they get a special reward. Maybe this is executive retirement package, 500 aeons. And so the worldling remains there all his life, but when he's completed lifespan, again he loses that executive package and gets reborn in one of the 3 lower realms. But the Buddha's disciple gets reborn there, and then he remains there all his life, and then when he completes his lifespan, he attains final nirvana, final liberation in that same state of existence. So that's the difference between the uninstructed worldling who develops these higher meditations and the Buddha's disciple, the one who has wisdom. It might seem unfair. Why should the ordinary person still be subject to lower types of rebirth, whereas the Buddha's disciple gets final nirvana? It's not a matter of fairness, but it's a matter of the faculties that they possess. So the one who is without that quality of wisdom or that penetrative right view will cling to this higher type of rebirth and think, this is the ultimate, this is the supreme, this is the final goal. And because they're clinging to that delightful state of existence, very blissful, very joyful, very peaceful, and the lifespan is so long, they think this is eternity itself. And so this wrong view, this misinterpretation is crept in, and this deep clinging to that bliss and peace of that realm. But the Buddha's disciple has the right understanding that this is a conditioned realm of existence, and he's able to focus even on his experience in that realm as subject to arising and passing away, that is impermanent, and recognize that whatever is impermanent is bound up with suffering, and that whatever arises and passes cannot be taken as self. And so we'll have this triple insight into impermanence, suffering, and non-self, and uses that triple insight to reach final liberation. Okay, then just to go on and conclude, the last 2 paragraphs, you have to remember now that this is all part of the process of deepening one's perspective on the world, gaining a deeper understanding of the nature of worldly existence. And so these 2 passages that we come to now show in a very broad, comprehensive way what might be called the comprehensive danger of samsara. So here the Buddha starts off by saying that this samsara, this round of existence, this process of cyclic existence, is without any discoverable beginning. A first point is not discerned as beings roaming and wandering, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. Then the Buddha asked the question, what do you think, which is more, the stream of tears that you have shed as you have roamed and wandered through this long course of samsara, weeping and wailing because of being united with the disagreeable and separated from the agreeable, this or the water in the 4 great oceans? And then the monks know the answer that the Buddha expects, and so they say, insofar as we understand the Dhamma, the stream of tears we have shed, roaming and wandering in this long samsara, this is greater than the water in the four great oceans. Then the Buddha approves and says, so it is, so it is. The stream of tears that you have shed as you have roamed and wandered is greater than the water in the four great oceans. Then the Buddha explains why this is so. He says, for a long time you have experienced the death of your mother, and when you experienced this, you wept and wept and wailed. Then you've experienced the death of your father, death of brother, death of sister, death of son, death of daughter, loss of relatives, and so on and so on. And as you've experienced all of this, you have shed tears which are greater in amount than the water in the four great oceans. And so it might seem that when we weep on any single occasion, that just a few tears come out, even if we're really miserable and upset. Maybe we weep for 5 minutes, and the amount of tears they could barely be contained on a blotter. But if we take all of these tears through beginningless time, going back life before life before life before life, you combine them all together, then you get a mass which is great, not to any of the four great lakes. We have 4 great lakes, or 7? In the U.S., 5 great lakes. But greater than the 4 great oceans, the Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, or maybe the Buddhist text don't elevate Atlantic Ocean. I think they probably are thinking of the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal. I don't know what others. Okay, then the next passage basically says the same thing about the amount of blood that we've shed as we've gone on through this samsaric existence. And we shed this blood I think I'm going to go on to the end of that. I think that's the final one. Okay, and we've shed this blood because in the bottom paragraph on 219, this is a little frightening, this paragraph. For a long time, we've been captured, and for a long time, we've been cattle, and as cattle we've been beheaded. We've been buffaloes, sheep, goats, deer, chickens, pigs, been slaughtered and have been beheaded. For a long time we've been arrested, and many times been arrested as burglars, adulterers, and so on, and we've been beheaded. And each time we're beheaded, we shed so much blood. And when you combine all of this blood together, it's greater than the blood in the 4 great oceans. Okay, it's a bit melodramatic, that passage, but it brings out this idea of the danger of samsara. Okay, if there's any quick questions, I could take them now, and I'll have to go for lunch, maybe in about 10 minutes, but then I'll come back after about 20 minutes, and then if anybody wants to stay, we can have some discussion. Any questions? Don't be ashamed if you're embarrassed to ask. But the question has to pertain to the subject matter.
According to the reading, that any one of the divine learning, if you practice, eventually you will be reborn in that right? And then eventually you attain nirvana.
Say it again, I didn't quite catch the question.
And according to this reading,
Yeah.
any one practice of divine realm,
Yeah.
Brahma Vihara,
Yeah.
will lead eventually
Yeah.
to achieving the nirvana. Is that correct?
Okay, she's asking whether the practice of any of these four Brahma Viharas will eventually lead to the attainment of nirvana. Is that correct? After rebirth of the divine realm. Well, the point of the passage is that attaining the Brahma Vihara itself, the divine meditation, there's some things that have to be further explained along with this passage. In order to get reborn in these divine realms, one has to practice the Brahma Vihara, the divine meditation, up to a level of sufficient depth corresponding to the level of consciousness in that realm. So it would have to be developed to the level of one of the four jhanas. If one just sits and occasionally, say, practices loving kindness meditation and is still wandering thoughts, or the loving kindness meditation doesn't go very deep, one will not be reborn in that realm. But this is a meditator who practices that meditation to a level of very deep samadhi. So it's that mind of samadhi that brings the rebirth in the divine realm. But even then, as the sutta makes clear, one doesn't automatically achieve nirvana from that realm. Because if one practices without the accompaniment of wisdom, the right view and the insight wisdom, then one can easily be attached to that realm, and then the delusion will prevail, and then one will pass away and take rebirth elsewhere. But it's one who possesses that very soft, penetrated insight wisdom that can then use it within that realm to continue on along the path to liberation, to nirvana.
They have to keep practicing from the Deva. Is that?
Okay, so the next question is, do they have to keep practicing in the Deva realm?
Yes.
Yes, they would have to practice developing that practice, that wisdom, that insight in the Deva realm. Okay, yeah. Any further questions? Okay, if there are no further questions right now, then we'll terminate the class today. And as I said, I will come back in about 20-25 minutes. If anybody wants to discuss points further, then we can have some discussion. Okay, we'll end now with the sharing of the merits. I think the sheet has been handed out with the verses. Okay, this is to share the merits with the devas, the deities, and the Buddhas, the spirits, asking them to protect the Dharma, to protect ourselves and others, to protect the world. Akasata Bhumata Deva Naga Mahipika Punyantam Anumoditva Sivam Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Bhumata Deva Naga Mahipika Punyantam Anumoditva Sivam Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Bhumata Deva Naga Mahipika Punyantam Anumoditva Sivam Rakantu Mantam Ekāvataka Amhehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sade Deva Anumodantu Sada Sampati Siddhya Etavatasam Hehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sarve Bhutanumodhantu Sabha Sampati Siddhya Etavatasam Hehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Sata Anumodantu Sabha Sampati Siddhya Pavadupadaya Aditi Esato Etantare Satakaya Papana Rupiya Rupita Asanya Sannino Dukha Babutantu Pusantu Mi Buddhin